The stench of horse dung and stale hay was all Rylan had ever known. His days were an endless blur of mucking stalls, hauling feed, and mending worn tack under the watchful eye of old Garth, the surly stable-master. He wasn't built for this work, too lanky, too soft, Garth would grumble. Yet Rylan found a strange comfort in the rhythm of it, the silent kinship with the broad-flanked plough-horses and the wiry riding mares. But something always pulled at him, a restlessness humming beneath his skin. It was on moonlit nights that it hit hardest, the longing. From the stable loft, he'd peer across the shadowed valley to where the Silverspire Mountains pierced the heavens, home to the legendary Dragon Hall. Dragon riders, elite warriors chosen to bond spirit and soul with the magnificent beasts, patrolled those skies, gleaming sentinels against the ever-present threat from the wilderlands beyond. Tales of their exploits were whispered throughout the kingdom of Andara, fueling the dreams of every stable hand or blacksmith's son. Yet dragon riders were born of noble blood, not of dust and horse sweat. Garth would scoff at Rylan's stolen glances towards the mountains, muttering, "Eyes on your work, boy, before you end up under a plough yourself." Then came the day the riders descended. 3 dragons, sunlight gleaming off their emerald scales, alighted in the grand courtyard of Stonekeep Castle. The entire village flocked to catch a glimpse of the magnificent beasts and the sombre-faced riders, clad in silver and sapphire. The air vibrated with the dragon's low rumble, a thrum that seemed to beat in time with Rylan's heart. Garth, usually quick with a cuff around the ears, stood slack-jawed. It was as if, for one crystalline moment, the whole world held its breath in awe. Then a proclamation echoed from the castle walls. Trials, open trials for new riders. A path to the heavens for anyone brave enough to seize it. The stable-yard emptied in a heartbeat. It was pure madness, farm lads and merchants' daughters scrambling towards Stonekeep with hope blazing in their eyes. Garth, snapping out of his stupor, locked the stable doors and snarled, "None of that nonsense for you, boy. Trials is for the high-born fools, not the likes of us." But something had shifted within Rylan. The impossible felt possible. That night, he didn't sleep in the hayloft. He crept out, the moon his only guide, and made his way to the castle. Stonekeep, usually a looming, intimidating presence, hummed with excitement. The courtyard swarmed with hopefuls, proud sons of knights, blacksmiths with arms like tree trunks, even a handful of girls with flashing eyes, defying tradition. Rylan felt a surge of panic, his stable-stained clothes a glaring pronouncement of his humble origins. What madness possessed him to think even for a moment that he could stand amongst them? Yet as he turned to flee, his gaze snagged on a lone figure leaning against a moon-dappled pillar. Older than the rest, scars crisscrossed his weathered face. His eyes, a startling shade of violet, met Rylan's with a spark of quiet curiosity, but not the sneer of contempt Rylan expected. "Don't like your chances, stable boy," the man's voice rasped, a hint of amusement in it. No, sir," Rylan stammered. It's just—" The man chuckled, a surprisingly warm sound. "You don't belong, I know the feeling." He extended a calloused hand. "Name's Kalen, rancher's son once upon a time. Didn't stop me." Kalen's words, his casual acceptance, did something to Rylan's tangled nerves. He took the hand, realizing Kalen, despite his fine tunic and sword, was an outsider too. "Rylan," he mumbled, finding his voice. "Stable hand." "Well, Rylan the stable hand, the first trial starts at dawn," Kalen said, his grin widening. "Get some rest or don't. Makes little difference with dragons. They don't give a damn about your bloodline. They see right through to your guts." Dawn painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, mirroring the knot of fear churning in Rylan's stomach. The courtyard, buzzing with nervous energy the night before, was now an austere arena ringed by grim-faced knights and a single shrouded figure, the Dragon Master, legend whispered. The first trial was simple in its brutality. Approach a hatchling. Dragons, even newly hatched, were magnificent and deadly. Their instincts razor-sharp. Any sign of hesitation, any flicker of fear in the eyes of a supplicant, and the beast would lash out. Many trials ended right there, hopefuls carted off with scorched clothes and wounded pride, if they were lucky. Names were called, and one by one sons and daughters of nobles strode forward, some with feigned bravado, others trembling like leaves. The hatchling, A serpentine creature with scales of burnished copper hissed and coiled, its slitted eyes darting across the crowd, seemingly unimpressed by the lineage paraded before it. Kaelin was rejected with a dismissive flick of the creature's tail, but he only shrugged and returned to his place, his violet eyes glinting with a strange resolve. "Rylan of nowhere," the announcer drawled, his voice laced with a disdain reserved for those with no family name to boast of. The crowd parted, and all eyes turned to him. Rylan's knees wobbled, but a stubborn defiance flared within him. He thought of the gentle nudge of a mare's nose, the warmth of their breath on his skin in winter, the quiet understanding forged over countless hours in the stable. He walked forward, the hatchling's burning gaze searing into him. With each step he shed his fear like an old cloak. He didn't bow his head as the others had, didn't extend a placating hand. He simply stopped a few paces away and met the dragon's stare, his own eyes clear. Silence stretched. The hatchling tilted its head, a flicker of something like curiosity rippling through its reptilian form. It uncoiled, moving with surprising grace towards Rylan. Time seemed to freeze as the creature approached, its snout brushing tentatively against his outstretched hand. He felt a jolt, not of pain, but of recognition. A connection. A gasp echoed through the courtyard. He had passed. The impossible had happened. Rylan, the stable boy with no name, no lineage, had somehow earned the attention of a dragon, yet his triumph felt less like jubilation and more like a dizzying plunge into an abyss. The real trials hadn't even begun. The remaining candidates were filtered through a grueling gauntlet, tests of swordsmanship, strength, endurance. Those born to privilege had spent lifetimes honed for this. Rylan was a clumsy swordsman, his muscles more suited to lifting bales than wielding blades. Still he stumbled onward, driven by a desperation born from the lifetime spent yearning for a life beyond his grasp. Through sheer grit he managed to survive each trial, scraped and bruised but alive. The other candidates, at first dismissive, shifted to wary acceptance. Even a whisper of respect threaded through Kaelin's crooked grin, a stark contrast to the disdain etched across the faces of the highborn knights supervising them. But mere survival wasn't enough to truly become a dragon rider. One must forge the bond, a mystical communion of spirit, mind, and raw instinct. Rylan's hatchling, now named Ember for the fiery glow within her scales, was growing swiftly, a testament to the potential flickering within her. Yet that potential would remain locked away without the bond. The Dragon Master, an enigmatic figure cloaked in twilight blue, provided sparse directions and cryptic warnings. "The bond is a dance," he rasped. "You must learn to lead, to follow, to become one with your beast." Rylan spent agonizing hours sitting with Ember, reaching out hesitantly with his mind. He thought of the bond he shared with the gentle plough horses, the unspoken language of trust and companionship. But Ember was not a horse. She was fire-given form, wild and unpredictable, and the chasm between them felt insurmountable. Days blurred into weeks. Other riders were forging their bonds, bursts of triumphant roars echoing from the training grounds as young dragons took flight with a human counterpart bonded to their will. Rylan's desperation curdled into despair. He was failing. The impossible, which had dangled so close, was slipping from his grasp. One moonless night, driven by a mix of frustration and despair, Rylan found himself back in the familiar confines of the stable. The scent of hay and leather was a balm to his battered spirit. Here he was in his element, the rhythm of work a comfort, yet even here the echoes of his failing haunted him. "Don't get it twisted, boy." Garth's gruff voice broke the silence. "You ain't no rider, no matter how much dragon dung you clean up tomorrow." Garth was right. Even if by some miracle he bonded with Ember, he'd always be an outsider amongst the true riders, his blood too thin, his knowledge too scant. Yet, when he thought of leaving, his heart clenched. A soft snort drew his attention. Ember, sleek and powerful in the moonlight, nuzzled him gently. A flicker of an emotion he couldn't quite decipher passed through her luminous eyes. Shame? Frustration of her own? Or perhaps understanding? That night, Rylan didn't try to meditate or forge the bond. Instead, he groomed Ember until her scales shone like beaten copper. He told her stories of old plough horses, of moonlit runs, of the yearning in his heart that had led him to her. He spoke of his failures, his fears, his desperate desire, not to conquer but to connect. And that's when it hit him, a revelation as startling as lightning. He wasn't approaching the bond wrong because he was a stable boy. He was approaching it wrong because he was trying to be someone he wasn't. The next morning, he walked into the Dragon Master's austere chambers and did something unheard of. He requested a change in training. "My lord," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, "I will never be a great swordsman. My knowledge of military strategy could fill a thimble. But I know horses and I know dragons are more than weapons. I respectfully request to start again from the bottom." Confusion, then a spark of amusement flickered across the Dragon Master's face. An unorthodox path. "Are you willing to start with the younglings too stubborn even for a stable?" "I am," Rylan replied without hesitation. He didn't want glory, he wanted understanding. Rylan's new path was one of humility and sweat. He wasn't just training dragons anymore, he was learning from them. The younglings, wild and untamed, were brutally honest teachers. One moment they'd nuzzle his palm, the next they'd snap playful but painful, bites at his fingers. He learned to anticipate their moods, to read the subtle shift in their scales, the flick of an ear that signalled irritation or playful mischief. Kaelan, forever an outsider himself, looked on with approval. The other candidates, initially bemused by Rylan's request, now watched with grudging respect. He didn't become the best with a sword or spear, but he became the best at understanding his dragon. Ember grew, gaining strength and grace alongside Rylan's unorthodox training. Their bond, forged not through force of will but through shared understanding, was a thing of quiet power. Ember wasn't the most obedient dragon in the hall, but her responsiveness to Rylan's cues, the silent communication between them, was awe-inspiring. Where others stumbled, Rylan and Ember soared. Then came the whispers from the wilderlands. Scouts reported strange beasts massing, monstrous creatures twisted by some dark magic. The uneasy peace that Andara had long known was fracturing. More worrying were the hushed rumours of a traitor within their midst, someone working to undermine the riders from the inside. The final trial loomed, a battle simulation meant to test rider and dragon as one. The night before, as Rylan lay under the stars with Ember's warm flank pressed against his side, her rumbling purr more soothing than any lullaby, a sense of foreboding washed over him. Something was wrong. He wasn't just facing a trial, he was facing war. The morning dawned clear and bright, a jarring contrast to the tempest brewing on the horizon. One by one, candidates soared into the sky, their bonded dragons cutting through the air in gleaming formations. Yet a sense of unease prickled Rylan's skin. Something was off, and then it happened. Mid-flight, one of the dragons, a magnificent emerald beast, let out a shriek of agony, contorting in the air, before crashing into the courtyard below. Its rider, a promising young woman, lay broken and bleeding amidst the chaos. Panic surged through the crowd. Sabotage. The traitor had struck. The Dragon Master, a silhouette against the blindingly blue sky, bellowed orders, his calm cracking under the strain. Rylan and Kaelan scrambled towards the fallen rider, the ashen taste of fear in the air. But even as the order for the remaining riders to land echoed through the valley, a second dragon shrieked, its wings buckling as it spiraled out of control. The ground trembled with the impact, dust and screams filling the air. "Someone's poisoning them!" Kaelan yelled, his violet eyes wide with horrified realization. Chaos reigned. More riders were dismounting, trying to calm their disoriented dragons. Yet, amidst the mayhem, an image seared itself into Rylan's mind. A flash of movement from the castle shadows, a figure disappearing into a side passage. Instinct, honed from years of sensing a skittish horse or a colicky mare, surged through him. "Trust your gut," Garth's gruff voice whispered in his memory. He didn't hesitate. "Kaelan, get the Dragon Master," he barked, already sprinting towards the castle, Ember thundering at his side. The ancient stones of Stonekeep buzzed with a sinister energy. Rylan didn't know where he was going, only that each step took him deeper into the heart of betrayal. Finally, instinct led him to an obscure door half hidden behind a tapestry. He burst in, expecting to encounter armed guards. Instead, he found a figure hunched over a steaming cauldron, the pungent odour of poison filling the room. Lady Alara, a senior noblewoman and distant adviser to the king, whirled around. Surprise was swiftly replaced with a cold fury that contorted her once beautiful face. "Stable boy," she sneered, venom dripping from her voice. "What game are you playing at?" "It's over," Rylan rasped, his throat raw from dust and exertion. Word of the attack must have reached her, but she was trapped. Ember, sensing his intent, pressed closer, a low growl rumbling from her throat. Lady Alara's composure cracked. "Over. Fool. You think a few dragons matter? My master offers true power, the chance to rule, not serve." "Your master?" Rylan pressed, stalling for time, praying Kaelin and the Dragon Master had heard and would reach him in time. Lady Alara laughed, a chilling sound in the dim chamber. "The Shadow Drake," she hissed, a flicker of fanaticism replacing her fear. "He will cleanse this weak kingdom and forge a new order. My blood, the blood of the old rulers, runs in my veins." The pieces clicked into place. Not a traitor, but a usurper. Legend spoke of the Shadow Drake, a corrupted dragon of monstrous power, rumoured to dwell deep in the Shadowfell Mountains. Lady Alara wasn't undermining the riders, she was aiming to replace them. Just then the sound of heavy boots echoed down the corridor. The Dragon Master and Kaelin thundered into the room with guards close behind. Lady Alara lunged for a vial, desperation in her eyes, but it was too late. She was seized kicking and screaming curses. In the aftermath, the full extent of her treachery unravelled. She wasn't a lone conspirator, but the pawn of a dark cult, their tendrils embedded deep within the kingdom. The poisonings were just the beginning. A strike aimed to cripple Andara's most potent defence. Yet the war hadn't truly begun. News came from the border. Monstrous hordes, led by a shadowy figure cloaked in darkness atop a colossal drake, were descending from the mountains. Andara stood on the precipice of annihilation. The Dragon Master turned his steely gaze onto Rylan. "You were right, boy. This is war, not a mere trial, and you have a role to play in it." The final battle took place in a blood-soaked valley, Andara's forces dwarfed by the monstrous legions swarming from the Wilderlands. Ordinary soldiers fell like wheat before a scythe, their courage no match for the grotesque behemoths led by the Shadow Drake and its corrupted rider. The remaining dragon riders, though depleted by the traitor's poisonings, fought valiantly. But even their winged magnificence was fading in the onslaught. Kaelin, astride his scarred obsidian dragon, went down in a blaze of dragonfire, a flicker of defiance in his violet eyes to the last. Rylan, amidst the chaos, felt a cold certainty settle over him. There would be no grand victories, no miraculous turning of the tide. This was a battle for survival, for buying time, not for winning. It was up to him now. "Ember," he whispered, his voice strangely steady against the cacophony of battle, "we fly differently." The plan was reckless, born of desperation and a lifetime of knowing horses. Dragon riders were aerial warriors, trained in formations and strafing attacks. But Rylan and Ember had learned something different: agility, empathy, a bond forged on the ground first. They didn't soar above the battle, they dove straight into its heart. Ember twisted and banked, her scales deflecting arrows and talons. Rylan, not with lance or sword, but with flasks of volatile oil and specially crafted torches strapped to his saddle, became a whirlwind of fire. They targeted not the monstrous hordes, that was a hopeless task, but the leadership, the lieutenants of the Shadow Drake, identifiable by their twisted, diseased scales. It was close-quarters combat, a dance with death as Ember dodged claws and fangs while Rylan aimed true. One by one the foul leaders fell, their piercing cries disrupting the rhythm of the horde. The beasts, without their foul master's guidance, faltered. Some turned on each other in the ensuing confusion, animal instinct warped by dark magic. It wasn't victory, but it was chaos, and in that chaos lay a sliver of hope. Exhaustion threatened to drag him down, his lungs burning, yet he pushed on. Then he saw it, a flash of black scales against the crimson sunset, the Shadow Drake eclipsing all else. Atop it, a figure twisted in malice, Lady Alara, her eyes blazing with a triumphant madness. A surge of hot fury coursed through him. It was because of her, her ambition and her poisoned lies, that good men like Kaelin lay dead. With a silent command he steered Ember toward the monstrous dragon. In that moment, boy and beast became one. Ember weaved through a hail of claws, her roar defiant. Rylan flung the last of his fire. The flames caught on oily scales and the Shadow Drake shrieked, its corrupt power momentarily disrupted. Lady Alara, thrown from her saddle, tumbled through the air, her screams echoing across the battlefield. It was their only opening. The other dragon riders, seeing the beast falter, rallied for a final desperate charge. Rylan and Ember dove, snatching Lady Alara in mid-air, not out of mercy, but necessity. She was their leverage, their last fragile chance. The remaining riders formed a protective circle, their dragons interlocked in a barrier of scales and flame. Rylan, with Lady Alara clawing at his legs, landed amidst the carnage. The shadow drake thrashed in fury, but even in its corrupted state there was a flicker of hesitation, a chilling intelligence twisting its rage. Rylan stood, battered and bruised, Lady Alara pressed to the ground at his feet, his voice raw from smoke and battle carried across the devastated valley. For every life your beast has taken, I'll take hers, one by one. A collective gasp cut through the monstrous horde and the defiant cries of the defenders. This wasn't a warrior's challenge. This was something primal, something the shadow drake, twisted as it was, would understand, vengeance pure and simple. A guttural roar echoed in answer, a challenge accepted. The shadow drake hovered, its massive form blotting out the dying sun. Then, with a lurch, it retreated. Its monstrous followers, confused and leaderless, followed, their gruesome tide flowing back into the darkness from whence they came. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. Rylan, amidst the cheers of ragged survivors, looked down at Lady Alara, her eyes now mirroring the bleak emptiness of the ravaged battlefield. There would be trials, executions, and the kingdom would bleed from this wound for generations. Yet as he met Ember's luminous gaze, he felt something shift within him. He was no conquering hero, no legend born in battle. He was Rylan, the stable boy who'd bonded with a dragon. And they had a kingdom to rebuild, a darkness to fight, and a future to forge, not through force alone, but through the quiet strength of bonds, and the unwavering belief that even against impossible odds, a single act of courage can change the course of a war.